Mike Golic Jr. joins us right now. Mike, I know you were on the call down in Durham for the Notre Dame Duke game. Start with this. Moving forward with those two programs, what was your biggest takeaway from both teams, whether it be positive or negative, for Notre Dame and Duke moving forward?
Yeah, I think in the immediate future for Duke, the injury to Riley Leonard just crushing. And we were all fortunate. I breathed a sigh of relief when you find out it's just a high ankle sprain. And I say just, knowing that that's a really brutal injury, that it can take weeks, if not longer, to actually recover. But just glad it wasn't a knee, something even more serious than it looked like in person. Because, guys, while this was a brutal loss for Duke in the moment, they're still undefeated in conference play right now. And in the ACC, where you've got North Carolina, Miami, Florida State undefeated, Duke was right in the mix as far as their quest to try and go out for a conference title, and looked like a team that actually would have been in the mix based on how they're built right now and the way Mike Elko's coached them. So that result, unfortunately, seems damning in the immediacy for that, but what a great trajectory for that program. And then for Notre Dame, it wasn't perfect. You could see some hangover elements maybe from the Ohio State game. 12 penalties in this game, a lot of pre-snap penalties that looked like a bit of lack of focus at time from guys responding to a pretty great crowd environment that Duke had built up that day. But they get to coach that from a win. And for Notre Dame, all of their hopes and dreams as far as holding on to the idea of an 11-1 playoff bid still on the table now, because they were able to do what Ohio State did to them the week before and find a way to win a game that they had not been the better team on the field during for most of the entirety of that outing.
You know, it's interesting. If it was going to happen, Junior, this is probably the best time for Duke because they do have a bye coming up. Then they have NC State at home, who is okay, but they're no powerhouse. If he can get back fully healthy for the game in Tallahassee in 3 weeks, then I think Duke really has a chance to have a say-so in who wins the ACC.
I would like to believe that. The only thing that gives me pause is even if he's able to get back in that amount of time, you know this, a high ankle sprain, that's not something that's going to be fully healed by that point. And the one thing that became abundantly clear watching that Duke offense was Riley Leonard's legs are the driver. They're the secret sauce for everything else that works on that offense. A very good Notre Dame defense that they went up against in that game that for the majority of the outing was able to keep them in check. But you saw at the end of the first half, when they started actually mixing in Riley Leonard designed runs, and a lot of that was just normal read option stuff through the body of inside zone handoffs. After a while, that really started to wear on the Notre Dame defense, having to keep eyes on Riley Leonard, who is probably the most gifted athlete on that offense when he gets into the open field, big, strong, physical, but also fast enough with enough wiggle to get away from you. If that's compromised, I do think it affects their ability to move the football on the ground against better defenses. And so hopefully he can get back on the field because he's still great in so many ways, but came into this game more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. And I think that's emblematic of what they need from him skill set wise to be competitive on the top end of the conference.
You know, it's an interesting conference. It's one that I didn't think was as strong because I thought Clemson has a downward trajectory simply because Dabo has refused to evolve and change and pivot, doesn't still want to get involved in the transfer portal, stays away from the NIL. So I thought the talent level overall in Clemson would slightly be down and will continue to get worse if he doesn't change. But this conference, when you look at it, we thought Louisville, who we have a ticket, here on the show to win the ACC because of the schedule, had a shot. But Miami looks super talented. Drake May in North Carolina, no one's talking about them. They're undefeated. And, of course, you have Florida State sitting there. How would you handicap the ACC as we sit here?
Yeah, I'd have Florida State as the favorite right now. I understand they sort of had down weeks against inferior competition in Boston College. I would say about the Clemson game, though, that's still a Clemson defense that's championship level. When we really look at the problems for Clemson this year, they're definitely in an interesting spot because of everything that you mentioned. But when you look at the offense, there's still a lot of highly ranked recruits. Cade Klubnik was a guy that had a good star rating next to his name, but they just haven't played up to what's normally had to be there to succeed for Clemson, which is all-world quarterback play, incredible wide receiver play as they're getting into a new offensive system with Garrett Riley. So they're interesting, but I would go Florida State in that mix. I would probably have North Carolina and Miami neck and neck after that. Miami's been fascinating because they're undefeated. No one has seemed to care nationally. They've got to win out of conference against the Texas A&M team that was ranked at the time. came down to Miami and got beat by a Miami team that looks bigger and improved in the trenches, which we would expect under Mario Cristobal. But more importantly for them, they seem to have 2021's Tyler Van Dyke back. Some of the downfield passing numbers for him this season, emblematic of that run that we saw to end 2021 that got so many people excited. I'm going to be fascinated to see as they get into the bulk of their schedule, where in a couple of weeks they'll have North Carolina and Clemson back to back, what that team looks like against up better competition, since outside of Texas A&M, the schedule has been pretty light so far.
We're talking to Mike Golic Jr. Make sure to check him and his dad on Golic and Gojo on weekday mornings here on the DK Network. Also on the weekends, as we mentioned, Mike was on the road this past weekend, Duke and Notre Dame. I believe, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, Kentucky and Georgia for you this week?
Heading down to Athens, first trip down there. Very
Beautiful.
Excited for it.
Well, I'm glad you're going to that game. I'm not going to ask for a pick or anything like that, but I'm curious, as you've been watching tape and preparing for this broadcast, what has been the issue, in your opinion, for Georgia? They haven't covered a spread yet this year. They've been kind of, it seems from afar, lackadaisical. Maybe they woke up a little bit late in that game last week against Auburn. What's been off, in your opinion, with Georgia so far this year?
Yeah, I think part of it's twofold. One, there's a lot of new around that offense, right? You had Mike Bobo coming back in after Todd Monken leaves to go for the Ravens. And while they're going to do some similar things, still a different voice in the room, breaking into a new quarterback, Carson Beck, who is incredibly talented, a little more in line of what we would think profile-wise the Georgia quarterback would look like. But Stetson Bennett was playing really good ball, knew where all the doors and windows were in that building by the time he left there, and was very used to everything at the helm. So a lot of newness there. And then I would just say injury. You look, they've been banged up along the offensive line, banged up in the running back room, banged up at wide receiver. Ladd McConkey, who has the whitest name to ever be saucing people up in the open field as frequently as he does, missed the first 4 games of the season with a back injury, just got back in the Auburn game and was a little bit limited there, but started to see the ball go through the basket again. And so I think all of that combined with the new voice in the room offensively has been why we've seen some slower starts, because it's been a lot of what we still saw in the past, which is, hey, how many ways can we get the ball to Brock Bowers? Which is smart business with the defending Mackey Award winner. I would probably endorse that strategy, but I think they're getting a little bit more health back as they get healthier going into the season in a couple of those position spots, because on the other side, I'm fascinated to watch that matchup with Ray Davis, Kentucky's running back, and this Georgia defense, where running into the teeth of it still looks like a pretty daunting task with Nazir Stackhouse and the rest of the guys in a Georgia defensive system that's still one of the best and most well-coached in college football.
It's interesting because the game you're doing, the winner of that probably has the inside road to oppose Georgia in the SEC title game. But I have a question that I got to ask, because this just blew my mind. Because when you look at recruiting, and I'm not a person that buys into the rankings because I was a college coach and I know how you can manipulate the rankings. If a kid gets a certain offer, his rating goes up. It's not always apples to apples. But there's no way in the world LSU should give up 700 yards of offense. I mean, what in the hell happened down in Oxford?
I'm trying to figure that out, too. I was at a game in Durham where we were about 10-0 or something at halftime, and I said, we were robbing Peter to pay Paul. All the points wandered down to Oxford for that game there. This LSU defense has been Jekyll and Hyde all season long. The offense is kind of consistently what we've expected, but I just can't make sense of it. With the amount of talent that they had returning on that defense, there's no excuse for it to look the way it has, so hot and cold this season. For a team that people thought, all right, after a year 1 trip to Atlanta, should be thinking national title now with the caliber of talent on that roster. But right now, defensively, looks like they're falling short of that standard.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.